What's up, people? Amar here, and today in this video we're gonna add assets and create our player's movement. So without further ado, let's get started. If this is your first project, you already know my thing. I usually explain how do I create this layout, what do you need for the project, and we can move on to actually adding the assets. If this is not your first video of watching me, you can just skip it like a few minutes and then we'll start adding our assets. So yeah, first of all, what I'm going to say is this is my layout and I like to use this one for actually making games. And this layout, I have it saved here, which is called workspace, and voila, here you go. How do you create this from the default? Let's say, for example, well, basically we'll have a hierarchy and inspector tab, half and half. If you didn't know about Unity's interface, you should probably watch my video. You can see everything here is dockable and you can put it anywhere you want. So as you can see, so if I go back to workspace, we have hierarchy and inspector tab, half by half. We have our game and scene, half by half, and project and console on the bottom here. So to create it from the default, you need just to have a hierarchy on the side with the inspector and have the game and scene side by side, except the scene will be here and the game will be out here. So let me just do that. And I'm not, oops, not here, but there. And I'm not having the asset store. So that's something that you can get rid of or not. And you can just pull up this up and down, this over here for the folders. I like to use it like this, tiny folders. And I'm using the resolution 1080 by 1920 for like full HD portrait mode on the mobile devices. And voila, here you go, you have my workspace. Also, what you can add is the animation if you need it for actually working with something else. I think for this one we will not need it, but animation and animator, I usually put them here and here. So right now we can go and move on by adding our assets. In a moment, I have it here, so let me just go ahead. This is stack ball, I need color bump. I'm just gonna take those and then put them inside my Unity. And we're gonna wait them to actually go in. They're not big, they're quite small because the game itself is quite small. I mean, there's just to have levels inside. Once you create the movement, once you add the models, it's pretty easy. So like you just have to create the levels for the game. And you will see this like physics-based game and it will be a lot of fun making one. So first of all, to create our player that will be a sphere, you will have to create something that our sphere can move on. Now, of course, in this game, that is not the case because our sphere will have its own Y, but of course I am going to create the ground first anyways. So I'm going to go here, right click on the hierarchy, go to 3D object and create a plane. So this is what I'm going to create. This is a plane and this will be our ground. So ground, and I will reset its position so it's at 0, 0, 0, 0. Once I'm done with that, I want to create the plane, which will be something like too big but really small over here, so something that we can use. So let's say, for example, we can use something like, let's say 13 on the Z. So I here add 13, come on, 13 on the Z. I mean, the bigger it is, the better. I mean, not always the better. That doesn't mean it's necessary, but we have some space to work on, even though we're not going to use it all. As for the Y, I am going to leave it at 1. As for the scale, I mean, 1, maybe 1 should do it. I don't know, we will see. Anything else with it we need to add on the ground will be the material. So here we're going to have our platform material, which looks like this. And I'm going to create 2. So I'm going to create actually 1 first. A 3D object, which will be a cube, a tiny little cube, which will be on the sides. As for the cubes, I'm going to say here 0.25, 0.25, and 0.25. Actually, the Y, I'm going to say 0.5, so it's a bit bigger. So if I go here, I will have this, and of course, this will be like 13, I think it was the scale of our plane. Let me see if I got it correctly. Yep, there, yeah, it's good. So this here will be our like bounce and cover for the for the player. Actually, this will be only covered for like visual aspect. We can also remove or add the box collider. I would like it removed because I want my game objects to fall off. For example, like a ball that is like an enemy, I want it to fall off with ease, but I don't want my player to go beyond it. So you have two ways to do it, and I'm going to show you both ways. So for now, I'm going to leave the box collider and then duplicate this one and put it on the side. Now let me check a bit closer. You can hold down alternative key or shift key if you want to move it by a set amount. If you hold the shift, it's .1. If you hold alternative, it's .1 as well. I think I did not change that, but you can change that in the settings. And of course, both of these will have the same material, which is the platform one. After that, I'm just going to change the camera perspective, so this will not be final, but you can click on the camera, choose the position you want it to be, so something for like here, so I can see my player throughout the whole game, and then hold down Shift and F, actually Shift Control F, and what are you seeing in the scene will be transformed into main camera. So you can put it like this. I mean, you can choose what you want. For now, it will be something like this, so we can actually see our player moving on and doing the stuff that we need to do with the player. And right now we will have to add the player. So to add a player, we will use a 3D object, which will be a sphere, which will look like this. We're gonna put it down somewhere around here on the ground, and this kinda is, I'm gonna put it at 1.2, 1.2, 1.2, so to make it a bit bigger. For the sphere collider, I'm gonna leave it as that. For the material, I'm going to leave the default material, but I am going to add rigid body. So rigid body, because this will be a rigid base game, as I said before. Mass, and that I'm not going to touch right now, but what I am going to touch will be the freeze, the Y position, and we can freeze the Y rotation. Now the rotation is not necessary, but I would recommend, I mean, not really, you can do it with or without, it doesn't really matter, but for the position I will use it. It will help me out throughout the game, and you will see why. And I'm going to rename this to player, like this, and we can add the component, which will be a script. So let's add another folder, scripts, because we want to keep things organized. We're going to have every single folder for everything. So let's go here, create a C# script, and we're going to create our player controller like this. After that, once Unity loads it up down here, as you can see, we have this circle that goes around. Once that is loaded, we can add our player controller to our player, and we can open it up in Visual Studio. Once that is done, we can start adding variables. So the first variable I am going to add will be our private rigid body. So private rigid body, and I'm going to call it RB, like shortcut for rigid body. Then we're going to have the private vector 3, which will be our last mouse position, so we can know where our mouse was last off. Then we're going to have a public float, which will be sensitivity, so sensitivity, which will be by default equals to 0.16f, and we're going to have clamp delta, so this will be like the limit, which will be equal to 42f, and then add the semicolon. After that, we can have the bounds, which will be public float bounds, and I'm going to check this later on. For now, I'm going to put it at 5. I'm not sure if it's correct or not. As I said, we're going to check it later on. And I will add that when we add the camera, because we will need one more vector 3, which will be for the velocity of the camera. Now in the awake function, so awake, we're going to initialize or reference a rigid body. So rigid body equals to get component, and we're just going to get the rigid body that we have inside of our player. So whenever you just type in get rigid body, it refers to this, whoever is holding this script, which means our player and this rigid body over here. After that, we can go in update function and start adding some stuff. Now, first of all, because we are using rigid body and we're going to move with our rigid body, we're not going to use the update, but we're going to use the fixed update over here. That is recommended because the update runs, the difference is the update runs every single second and fixed update is only the fixed amount of seconds. What's the difference? If you run the game in higher FPS, then it means it's going to be interrupted with the physics inside. Other than that, there's not pretty much difference, but it is recommended to use your rigid body, so whatever you're doing with rigid body, to be used in fixed update. And I forgot to mention that what's the difference between awake and the start. That is the difference because awake starts first. So if you type in void start, so void start, and then you add the void awake and you print here something like print start. I'm going to do the test right now while I'm at it. And here you print, for example, awake. You probably know this stuff, but I have to repeat it so you just know it better. And if I press play, you can see in the console awake and start. Yeah, it's simple as that. And let's move on, because I don't want you to be bothered with it if you already know this kind of stuff. As I was saying, in the fixed update, what are we going to do? First of all, we're going to check if we press down our button. So if input dot get mouse button, and we're going to check for the 0. What does this mean? First of all, input.get mouse button down returns if we press down the button, which is 0 or 1. What's the difference? 0 means our left mouse click. So that means this click over here that you can type in here. 1 will be our right mouse button click. So you do this one over here. So that is the difference between 0 and 1. Now, else, when you add the input.get mouse button 0, which means the left click, that will also get in the touches. So if you add and create a game that has like input get mouse button down 0, that also means on the mobile devices is a touch. So whenever you touch the screen or you click with the mouse, what are we going to do? We're going to say our vector3, which we're going to call a vector, just a vector, equals to last mouse position negative by input, so input dot get mouse position, so input dot mouse position, not get mouse position. But before we do that, I am gonna say if input, so input dot get mouse button down, so whenever we first click the button, we are gonna say that our last mouse position equals to input dot mouse, not indexer, but input dot mouse position. So what are we doing? Whenever I click on the screen, I'm gonna get the last mouse position, and my vector3 will be equals to last mouse position minus our mouse position. Now, what's the difference between get mouse button down and get mouse button? Get mouse button is only there for first frame, and get mouse button down is there whenever you hold it. And I'm gonna do a quick run test to show you guys what I mean. So print down, and here I'm just going to say button, so print btn and add a semicolon. So right now if I go here and start our game, let me just start it, you can see when I click, only click, you can see down btn, so down, down, down. But if I hold it, you're just going to see btn, 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 btn. But the first frames, there are like actually the first frames when I try to click it, as you can see, it's down, then button. And again, it will be down and btn, btn, btn as long as we hold it. So what will this do? Well, basically, this will have our last mouse position when we clicked on, and then when I move it, it will get the vector between these two mouse positions. So if I move it this way, we will have the calculation that we moved it down. If I move up, we're going to have the calculation that we moved up. That you're going to see later on. Then we're going to say that our last mouse position again equals to input dot get mouse position. So input dot mouse position, not get mouse position. And then we're going to set our vector3, not vector3, but our vector equals to new vector3, which will be our vector dot x 0 and then vector dot y, like this, and then add a semicolon. I'm going to explain this later on once we do this, which will be our vector 3, the vector 3 move force, which will be equal to vector 3 dot clamp magnitude, and then here we're going to have vector and we're going to have clamp delta, like this, semicolon, and we're going to have the rigid body add force. Let me explain one more time what's going on. Well, once we do this, we're just going to repeat the process, because if I move my mouse from here to here, I don't want my player to be moved only that one direction. So if I just click from here to like here to here, this ball will go like this. Okay, not like that, but actually, can I do it maybe from the top view like this? But what's the thing? If I move it like this, once I stop my mouse here, I want the ball to be stopped there. But if I don't check again for my last mouse input, what will happen is my ball will go and will just go and stay in that one direction, trying to go upwards and upwards, because I did not check one more time for where my mouse again was. So only when I'm moving the mouse constantly, my ball will be moved constantly. If I hold down and stop like here, my ball will move and stop like there until I start moving again. Then we're having the vector to be equal to the vector x and vector y, because when you click on the screen, this will have only y and x. There is no z into it. So if I move up, it's gonna move onto the z, which is up and down. But when I move it to the right or left, it will be the x transform, and our y will always be onto the previous position y. So that is the thing. Let me just pull up this on 0, but this is not cool. And what? I'm gonna move this a bit to the side, just a tiny bit. Or maybe I think it's the camera's problem. Never mind it. We're not gonna be bothered with that. Then what are we doing? We're setting that our move force equals to clamp magnitude. What's the thing? When you add, so we'll have rigid body dot add force, and let's say for example we add the vector, we're gonna have unlimited amount. So if I move it up from 1 to 100, it's gonna go. I mean, if I want to move it from 1 to 100, it's going to move to 1000 if I'm like fast or whatnot, if I move mouse from one screen to another. But if you have the clamp magnitude, it will return the copy of that vector, but it's going to be clamped to the max length, meaning it cannot go past this. So even if I flick it as fast as I can like this, it's always going to have that bounce that it cannot go through. So yeah, so we're gonna add here rigid body add force, and we're gonna add first of all we're gonna add should I do this or that? Okay, first of all, well, before we start, we're always gonna have here vector 3 dot forward multiplied by 2. What's this? Well, this will make our player always go forward. Right now we don't have our main camera following our player, but our player needs to always go forward because our camera will always go forward. Then, only then, we're gonna add other multipliers, like for example plus, and here we're gonna have negative move force, and then we're gonna multiply that by sensitivity of how much we have, and we're gonna remove rigid body dot velocity, then divide that by 5, and here we're going to have the force mode, so force mode dot velocity change, and add a semicolon, and I'm going to explain right now what's going on. So the best way to show you an example for it is actually to comment this out and add one thing by one. So if I add just rigid body dot add force, and I add vector 3, so vector 3 dot forward multiplied by 2, this will just make my ball go forward at some pretty enormous rate. So if I just go here, and as long as I'm holding down my left mouse button, it's going to go boom. And that's not something that I want. This here should only be there to add this amount forward to our move force. So if I add to it a move force without the negative sign, let's say move force multiplied by sensitivity, this will also work, but the move force will be vice versa. If it's not negative, I move down, it's gonna go up. So let me just show an example for it. to actually comment this out over here and just add the move force multiplied by sensitivity. If I move up, it's going to go down. And if I move down, it's going to go up. If I move left, it's going to go right. As you can see here, it's going to go right. And that's not something that we want. So for that case, we're going to add a negative value to our move force. Then, just like this, as you can see, it's pretty fast. It's not controllable. Like, I mean, kinda is, kinda not. It's kind of going pretty fast. I mean, you could say go to player and then here add sensitivity maybe to 0.1. I don't know. Let's try that. I click play, and this also works. As you can see, I mean, it's not that great, but it works. It can do its job. But the problem is if we add the vector 3 forward to it, so if we just add this, it immediately will get break. So I mean, it immediately will break. As you can see, it's going to go forward, but it's too fast forward. So for that, we need to take out our rigid body velocity. Now, if you just take out the rigid body velocity, it's gonna be a really small number, and it works. If I go up, it goes up. If I go down, it goes down. But it's still just like in center based, and it's not really working well. But if at the end I add if I divide it by 5, that will be added more numbers to it, and if I click play, you're gonna see that it works perfectly. So you can see it's always moving forward, and if I move it, it's moving at some degree that is actually not hurting our player. And for now I am gonna remove the vector 3 forward thing because it's not necessary to have. And let's try it like this. I never really tried it without vector 3 forward. Let's see if it's gonna work. Yeah, it is gonna work. It works perfectly. So as you can see, if I move it up, it's going to go up. If I move it down, it's going to move down. And voila, this is what we have. This is what we need. I mean, you could get the same exact thing to achieve without, with sensitivity being only with sensitivity and clamp delta. But as I said, the problem is when we add the camera follow, then we're going to see some difficulties actually moving it with the camera. Like that's the only part that we need. I mean, you could do something else, but I found this way to work out perfectly for me. You could do it like maybe add some in update function, some transform position to always move it forward by some degree. But I found this to work pretty nice. So for now, and for this video, that will be it. I kind of went in a bit more in depth. I don't know if you like that kind of style. Tell me if you do. I'm going to start doing it more. If you don't, I will stop and just do a brief introduction to it. But this really feels really smooth, really good. If you're not satisfied with some values, you can always go here. If it's too fast, you can lower it down. If it's too slow, you can pump this up and then go faster. If sensitivity is kind of too low, you can always increase it, and then voila, there you go. We have some enormous things. Enormous position, like it was like 3 or 2,000. So yeah guys, let me stop talking and I will see you in the next video.